is debt, credit, obligations, reciprocity, and gift. The importance of conceptualizing diverse economic relations. Le vamos a dar la palabra a la doctora Zdravka Todorova. Entonces, tienes toda, you have all time you want to, as yesterday, we know. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you once again for coming to the lecture. I am very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. This is my current work, and it's all based on exploring the role of money in the economy, as well in generally in social relations. I am trying to articulate the differences among various economic processes, as you heard from yesterday's lecture. And particularly today, I want to make the distinction between debt credit, obligation, reciprocity, and gift. And all of those are distinct from exchange. Usually, when economists conduct economic analysis, really they're discussing only exchange. So, of course, there are other relations, economic relations. For example, sacrifice. Okay. However, today I want to spend a little bit time just deciphering the differences among those listed here. Where is this interest into looking at diverse economic relations coming from? My work is based in the work of Thorstein Veblen, for one, as well as in post-Keynesian theory of money. So Veblen, for example, conceived of the economy as constituted by dichotomy in economic relations, in economic activity rather. So dichotomy is not the same thing as dualism. So dichotomy, there is a dual processes, but there is a common root. So there is a distinction in economic activity, but there is no separation or opposition. And so my initial interest in this work comes out of this conception of dichotomy in economic activity, as well as academic activity. And I have here listed a number of levels of this dichotomy. For example, in Veblen's work, the main distinction is between group regarding behavior and group regarding valuation and judgment versus self-regarding behavior and valuation. And from the outset, I want to stress that group regarding behavior, it doesn't mean or does not connote always good, okay? It does not always equate with public good. Because you can have group regarding behavior amongst a group that is hostile to somebody else, right? So Veblen's analysis of dichotomy is a little bit more complex than just opposing good versus bad, okay? Second level of distinction is what Veblen called workmanship, which generally can be described as any activity that supports the life process. However, again, a caution should be taken because workmanship can be applied in activities that underline often life process. So, for example, competition, competitive activities, or even, let's say, criminal activities, they require a certain amount of workmanship, knowledge. However, the importance here is to understand that at any one point of time, any activity can be evaluated on the basis of some technical workmanship, as opposed to what Veblen called predation. And predation, he basically defined as getting something for nothing. Okay, skipping work, skipping knowledge. Although again, the relationship is complex here because getting something for nothing often can necessitate some level of planning, skill set, and so on. So the theory of Veblen is rather complex. Here I'm outlining the dichotomies for the purpose of stressing the importance of conceiving the diversity in economic relations. So one basic distinction in economic analysis should be about making goods versus making money. So yesterday I talked about the monetary production economy. In the monetary production economy, the main motivation for production for markets is making money. And the production of goods is incidental to this process. So if we argue that all production takes place because we need goods, that's kind of putting a veil over the real economic activity. And so Veblen made this distinction as making goods, which the view is for the consumption as an end, as a main goal, versus making money where consumption goods are produced, but that's not the main goal. They are there so that they allow for some monetary return to take place. The implication of this is if you leave entirely everything into private investment, we may not achieve, for example, what we want in terms of satisfying human needs or full employment, as I discussed yesterday. And so this is related to what Veblen called industrial concern in broader term. Doesn't have to do only with industry per se, but just by maintaining some notion of a public good or public concern, and versus the business concern, which basically he argued that within the business enterprise even, you have an industrial concern, how to produce the goods, and business concern, how to actually sell them and make money. So, so this dichotomy is not businesses versus government to public goods, no. This dichotomy exists within the business itself, okay. And so another dichotomous distinction that institutionalists, especially after Veblen have made, is these instrumental valuations versus ceremonial valuation, as well as instrumental activity versus ceremonial activity. This is a little bit more complex at the moment to articulate, but at any one point of time, we can look at an economic activity and ask, what does it achieve? What is the main goal? And within the particular context, we can identify that this activity contains both some instrumental and ceremonial aspects. And this is basically with much of our economic activities. So this is kind of the first step of the reason why it is important to distinguish different economic activities and motivations, and not just to define everything as exchange. So the next step is let's look at those four processes in the first column. The first one is debt, and whenever we say debt, simultaneously this means credit, right? We don't have the illusion that these are two different things. Whenever there is debt, there is credit. And as a matter of fact, what money is debt credit. It's a relation. Money is not a thing that we dig out of the ground, right? Or that we drop with helicopters from the central bank. Money is in fact debt credit. Whenever we extend debt, we create money. And when this debt is accepted, this is what money is when it circulates. But nonetheless, in this context here, I want to distinguish debt credit process from exchange, because in the debt credit you have also interest, right? When you have debt, usually, well, sometimes we have zero interest, but most of the time there is interest payment. Veblen called this free income. So in the exchange, you have, I give you this, you give me that, and it's done. The transaction is done. There is no anticipation for future payment of interest and so on, right? And money is a means of payment in that too. So here, what I am introducing also is this distinction between activity driven by making money versus a kind of a activity that not monetary activity. As I discussed yesterday, I think in economic analysis it's important to recognize that the economy is not just monetary in terms of its activity, but there are other relations that are also economic relations, but they're not markets. So this, based on yesterday, now we are applying this to the four processes that I choose to discuss. So in the context of debt credit, if we look at the non-monetary driven activity, can we think of debt in non-monetary terms? And this is kind of an open question, you know. I have been thinking in analyzing this, and I think that one way to conceive of debt in non-monetary terms, which is somewhat paradoxical to say because debt we think is money. I just said that debt credit is money, right? But can we think of a different dimension of debt? And it is obligation, okay? Because alternatively, we can separate this obligation as a different process. But what I want to emphasize is that obligation in our lives is a main factor in our behavior. So think about the obligation of somebody to care for somebody. Of course, there is a lot much more to care than just obligation. Maybe love and so on. But there is also obligation. That is a socially determined norm, expectation. What are you obliged to do? And it's not just in your mind, but it requires real time, labor, and resources. Now, this doesn't need to be a monetary obligation. And so one of my purpose here is to stress that the economy is supported by non-monetary obligations. So I'm personally happy also to put this obligation as a whole other process, but I think it's a good starting point to think of debt in non-monetary term as obligation. And then, of course, in monetary terms, this is what finance is and where interest comes in. So with a non-monetary obligation, one way to think about is some sort of tribute. And when I say non-monetary obligation, it's not only about care and love and, you know, goodness. It could be oppressive, all sorts. So if we look at some feudal society or any other society, there are all sorts of obligation, even in religious context, that is not always very peaceful. There is all sorts of tribute throughout the history of humankind. But moving on to exchange, oftentimes economies conflate every other activity in society and everything in economy with exchange. And often when they talk about money, they basically explain the emergence of money through barter and so on. And so kind of conflate even barter and money. What I'm pointing out here that we can think of barter as a kind of a non-monetary representation or manifestation of exchange. You give me half a cow, I give you half a goat, okay, barter. Okay, in a sense, we can think of that. But exchange, we can think of, this is all the trade, including speculation and anything, all the monetary exchange, buying, selling, that's it. And again, I stress that my objective here is to say that the economy is not only about buying and selling, which is a little bit paradoxical. But really, when you think about the structure of the economy, it cannot be only just buying and selling by definition. When somebody is born, they need care right away, and it doesn't have to do anything with the markets at any one point of time. But nonetheless, is this the economy? Yes, it is the economy. Maybe there is some obligation to give care, and there are even other things that are not represented here that underline the care economy. So then, however, I want to make a distinction between exchange and reciprocity and then gift. And particularly, I want to stress the difference between reciprocity and gift. Okay, so a reciprocity, usually we think of reciprocity as a kind of a eye for an eye in the negative context, like you did a harm to me, and I will do equal amount of harm, for example. In the positive, it's a kind of a tit for tat, what they call in the United States. So a kind of there is an evaluation of some sort of equality, equal value, right? But it's not exactly exchange, because exchange is in one point of time, and reciprocity can be over time. So this month, you did this for me, but sometime in the future, without a specified time, because this is the key, I will do this for you. So favor, for example. So it's a kind of obligation, the reciprocity obligation, kind of close. But what is important is reciprocity is similar to exchange because there is a kind of valuation of, or notion of equal value or approximate value. With exchange, equal value. With reciprocity, some sort of notion of value estimation. Now, to contrast this with gift, think about the importance of not conflating reciprocity and gift is to recognize that there is actions in the economy that are disassociated from notion of value or calculating value or estimating value. I give a gift, and this doesn't mean only a physical thing, right? Could be my time, right? Without calculating necessarily how much you owe me, which then in this case is kind of reciprocity or even debt, if we monetize, or I don't necessarily expect anything, right? Gift is a gift. You just gave it. It's gone. And you forgot it, right? But does it mean that it's not real in terms of economic relations? And I think it's fundamental. So there is a whole literature on gift economy, and I do not like to label some part of the economy as the gift economy. I think that gift underlines every aspect of our economy. So even within the business enterprise, I think when you go to work, often we engage in gift without even thinking. We engage in reciprocity, definitely, and there are all sorts of obligations. So it's not only about exchange. When you engage in wage labor, you exchange your labor time for wages, but there is more to it. We give more than what we're paid for often, but not only this, to maintain social relation within work, outside of work. I think it's important to conceive of some economic relation that is not even reciprocity, the economic relation that doesn't involve any calculation about what am I going to get if I do this for you. And I think when we conflate reciprocity and gift, we are missing a lot of the human behavior. So now, if we think about reciprocity, it's not only about individuals, right? Interaction. But if you think about the public sphere, so when we think about notions of social insurance, and I'm not saying social assurance, so think about insurance, right? Insurance is you pay now to kind of insure yourself for future. But there is a kind of a tit for tat, right? It's a kind of, I pay in now this only because I expect in the future to be covered. So society will reciprocate, or the group that insures me will reciprocate. I will support them now. Maybe I will not need, and so on. But then if we think about the public sphere, a lot of what is all those social programs are about public reciprocity and public insurance. Now, however, and this is again an open question, to think about those things. I think there is a difference if we look at social assurance. You get it no matter what, even if you don't pay into the system. So if, let's say, if you think about Social Security, but there is not a specific tax associated with Social Security. In the United States, there is a Social Security tax. When we think about Social Security in this context, this is social insurance. I would call it, this is some sort of social reciprocity. If we say there is no such tax, right? And the tax, by the way, historically was put so that actually there is politically possible to make a social security program in the United States. But suppose there is no tax, but the government just say, everybody who is above whatever, they will have pension, right? There is a literature on that. Then that would be more like a gift or grant economy, what some economists have called. And that is social assurance. The assurance is every society, you know, will assure that there is a living standard in old age, and not only that. So I'm just pointing out that with respect to public policy and how we think about what is human right or human necessity and so on, there is difference when we think about reciprocity. I pay into the system, therefore I'm entitled onto this, versus this is a norm. We need some basic. So this is some brief implication about distinction between reciprocity and gift. Further, when we think about all of those processes, we can think also about, not only in positive terms, but also kind of about exploitation. So even when we think about gift, okay, not only to think about it is always nice, or how benevolent for me to be generous, right? But what about, Veblen talked about exploit, we can say exploitation. You know, if we, when we think about gift, like say knowledge developed by a group, and this group will share their knowledge, right? But somebody else will capitalize on that and will make it a commodity and generate profit. It precludes others from use that. That's exploit. So that's why I put in the second term under gift, when we have monetary driven activity, that the gifts of ones can be capitalized by others and turned into commodity. So when we look at the system as a whole, a gift also can support, and does support in our economy today, capital accumulation. And obviously, I do not need to tell you about primitive accumulation. That in a way, this is really what we can look at it in this way. But when we think about gift, is necessary, like I said, for example, if we think about unpaid labor, unpaid household work, care, and all of that, we can look at it as a gift. And so I want to think about gift in a broader term, not only as a kind of what has become popular, gift exchange, which is kind of a calculating, okay, let's, in order to achieve something as a collective, let's pretend, let's involve gift exchanging, which is a literally kind of reciprocity type of activity. So this is one level. These are processes. Now I'm relating those to some literature in psychology, and I'm building on Fiskes, he's a psychologist, and what he defined, and from a psychologist's point of view, he's basically making a strong claim. He says, within all society, I argue that we can identify these forms of sociality. And again, and just to point out, these are not economic systems. I right away want to say, don't think about that these are definite economic systems. Those forms of socialities, he argues, underline social life within every society. Now, they will vary across societies, of course, the content. So what I'm trying to do, I will first explain what are those forms of socialities, how they're different, but also what I'm trying to do is to kind of match them with the economic processes, although this is a preliminary way of thinking about, because there is more complexities, so some processes can occur in different forms of socialities, what I'm finding. So let me just go over the communal sharing. Sharing is where is very similar to basically what I discussed with respect to gift, that there is no calculation of value, how much I give and how much I expect. You just give it. It's unconditional, right? But also communal sharing can be, again, once again, is not all flowery and happy. It could, the sharing, there could be rules, like let's say on seniority, somebody will get something. But the point is that this idea that there is no calculation of how much and there is no keeping record. So that is why in communal sharing, there is no notion of debt credit. It's impossible, I argue, to think about debt because there is no unit of account, there is no accounting for. Now, the argument once again is not like we are having whole economies organized around that, no, but there are activities within the, or aspects of activities within our economic life that are based on communal sharing. So if you think about households, I cannot imagine a household without communal sharing, right? But communal sharing could be also part of other surprising units, possibly even within the business enterprise. I do not know. But you have in, this as a fundamental part of our economy. Then the second one that Fiske articulates is equity matching. So equity matching has to do with reciprocity, what I discussed, okay? And the equity matching has to do with notions of fairness and judgment about what is just. So what is a fair payment, all of this, equity match. So this will involve some notions and rules and even regulations about what is equal, what is right, what is just. Okay, so I think with equity matching we can think it's reciprocity and obligation. Now, the third one is authority ranking. Okay, and authority ranking, my objective here is not to imply that authority ranking is always some sort of bureaucratic structure or government, no. I'm arguing that authority ranking exists and it's basically a central element in markets. So one of my points is that these markets is social constructs that are also planned and even bureaucratic constructs. This whole idea that markets somehow are free and government is a bureaucracy, no. In a heterodox microeconomics, this is one point that you have to transcend this dualism and to recognize that within markets there is planning. So for example, Kenneth Galbraith, one of his arguments is on that. And so authority ranking basically involves some sort of structure which matches some hierarchy to a specific right to how much somebody will receive, generally in terms of distribution. So I'm arguing that the debt credit, which involves basically a monetized obligation and the payment of interest, it represents authority ranking. And so when we base a large part of our economy on financial sector, engaging into basically financialization of households, education, as we discussed, and everything else, we are basically having this more of authority ranking thinking, which is the opposite, not the opposite, but different from, let's say, communal sharing or even equity matching. So in equity matching, it's more a notion of fairness. In authority ranking, there is a kind of an authority structure. The final one, and here I somewhat deviate from Fiske in his explanation of the last one, and I actually rename it because he used basically markets, and then he used kind of the neoclassical notion of markets of supply demand, and he talks about pricing in a wrong way, I am interested in pricing in terms of administered prices and rather than prices are endogenous into the system. So I rename it market transacting. And what really this has to do is the market exchange and the market transactions. One of the characteristic of a market exchange, once the exchange is done, you have no direct obligation with the part. So you go to the store, to Walmart, you buy and you're gone. You know. Now, if we think about small businesses and around the corner, you know, the people, of course, you may engage in some kind of social activity. You can mix possibly your market transacting with some sort of other relation. But when we think about transaction, the transaction in itself is over right there. You're not obliged. With authority ranking, there is a hierarchy, there is specified possibly contracts and debt into the future. The relation is not severed. Now, your debt can be sold to others, but the point is you are still lingering on into this specific economic relation. And so I find that all of those central in our economy, and once we conflate them, we allow for missing basically information or missing research questions about various, first of all, kind of exploitative processes going in different relation. Once everything is kind of defined as exchange, somehow everything happens and it's fair. This was the price, this is what you gave, and it's done. But when we start digging into all of those different forms of sociality and economic processes, we can dissect the various ways in which exploit can proceed. And then furthermore, when we define everything as market transacting, and then of course say, well, everything else is not the economy, then we leave out a large portion of the economy. And also, we are kind of fixating ourselves in one point of time, the point of transaction. And it's more difficult to engage in structural systemic analysis when you do that. So I'm relating this to what I discussed yesterday about I talked about consumption process, but I explained to you that I locate this in the overall systems of processes of social provisioning. And I think that just to articulate some of the implications of looking at these diverse forms of sociality is, as I articulated first, not conflating everything to exchange, which is basically what some have called economics imperialism, okay? But when we think about economics, economics shouldn't be not only about exchange, therefore we should just rethink economics as including all these others. And then also another point is thinking about markets as social, okay? Oftentimes, even from kind of heterodox, or what we can call left, critique of markets, we say, well, the impersonal markets, the asocial. But that's on one hand, that's useful to say that when you have exchange, it's becoming more impersonal. But on the other hand, it misses all sorts of problems of markets being built, markets being constructed, markets being social. People are the ones that drive the markets. That are constructing the markets. So I think it's really problematic to think about markets as asocial. So that's why I'm pointing out you can even have gift relation even in markets. Now, not all markets. You're not going to have gift relation in the stock exchange. No. But I'm just saying in the business enterprise, you do have. People constantly give more than what they, for one or another reason. It could be also for fear. A fear can underline gift. So gift of care can be a situation of oppression, right? You can care, you can engage in care work for somebody because you may be even slave, right? So I'm just saying that I want to escape these analytical compartments and spheres of lives of our categories, not to oppose, of course, the households and the market, for one, but also even when we think about the category of gift, not to associate it always with a kind of pleasantness, but to look at oppression, domination, whatever, within those. And then, and this is the last one, that it's not about immutable categories, static, but that those are processes, and that's why I define all of those as process, right? That's why the emphasis. Yesterday I talked about the importance of thinking that the non-monetary world exists also as a part of the economy. I will not go about that. Yesterday we talked about this. And then yesterday also we located everything into the overall system of processes, but I kind of wanted to tie this to where we start last time. I think I will stop here, and then whatever comments and questions we can address.
Sure. Thank you very much a la doctora Zdravka Todorova por esta pues muy provocadora posición que tiene. Ahora vamos a recibir sus comentarios y sus preguntas. Tenemos alrededor de 50 minutos para ir cerrando a tiempo. Entonces, vamos a hacer la primera ronda, por favor, de preguntas que tengamos. ¿Sí? Sí, a ver, vamos a tomar las de los chicos y, a ver, acá nuestro compañero de azul, nombre y pregunta o comentario breve. Como quiera, si lo quieren hacer en español, pues lo hacemos, si no, yo ayudo con la traducción.
Bueno, mi nombre es Eduardo y lo voy a hacer en español, nada más.
O si quieres en inglés, ajá, sí.
Entonces, más bien es una cuestión como para profundizar en el entendimiento del mercado. Digo, se ha separado tanto ayer como hoy entre las actividades económicas que producen dinero y las que no. Entonces, más como para entender, si ya entendíamos ayer el consumo como un proceso, como siguiendo esa lógica, ¿cómo podríamos entender al mercado?
As a process. Okay. Just trying to understand market as an activity, how could we understand that? If we understood consumption as an activity, so how can we make the same approach to markets?
Okay. So, if you were you yesterday in okay, and I have this big picture of the different processes, so why didn't I put market as a process, right? Is this the question in a way? So my point of social provisioning, it takes place in different systems. So you can have a socialist economy, we have social provisioning. You can have a capitalist economy, you have social provisioning. And so these are the processes. I don't want to put overall market as a separate process because the economy can exist without markets, historically looking, right? Markets are relatively newer institutions that emerge in human society, right? And so if we're talking about the capitalist economy, we know that markets permeate, and increasingly so, have permeated everything. So even the biological processes. So let's say the reproduction of, within the household. So you can purchase reproductive services, surrogacy, eggs, and so on. So markets can permeate every single process that I discussed. So I didn't want to create a separate process market because I didn't want, because to make the point that markets can be everywhere. They don't have to be, even though the neoliberal agenda is to say that if you have a problem and a way to solve it, you create market to solve it, right? That's not the same as the neoclassical agenda. Neoclassical agenda says we have markets, sometimes they fail and whatnot. In the neoliberal agenda, markets don't fail, they solve problems. But I'm saying that's a discourse. That's not the economy, how it operates. And so I do not want to conceive as a market as a separate process, but as something that affects. And so when we say markets, it's about the market transacting, the last, but also the authority ranking we have, right, within markets. And so markets also can have these other forms of sociality. So I want to complicate the notion of markets that we have. Is this what the question was and what
I think it was how. Otra pregunta. Sí. Tu nombre, por favor.
My name is Carlos. I have to say thanks for your lecture. And because, well, I have a question on how we can classify the crisis of capitalism in this taxonomy that you present to us of the different process and relations in the society, and the categories that you rescue of American institutional school.
So there are different crises within capitalist economy and how we conceive of crisis. In Veblennian term, the biggest problem that Veblen articulated as the major problem of capitalism is the moving away from workmanship valuation towards elevating predation as a way of growth and wealth building. So one way to think about is market exchange in itself. It doesn't involve necessarily explanation of production and care and so on. So we have, for example, care crisis. Okay, so this is one example of crisis, environmental and so on. And so within those, I think one way to explain is the predominant notion that every single problem in the life process can be solved by markets and market transacting. Okay. Of course, we have different theories of crisis and why capitalism may or may not survive as a system, but I think that's one way to think about.
Mónica.
Once again, thank you very much. Zdravka, I have three comments and actually three questions and implicit in these comments. The first one, I would like to ask if you could please help me, and I'm trying to draw a line that link the three talks that you gave to us until right now. So the talk on Minsky, but presenting as a Minsky that goes beyond the financial stability hypothesis in the Minsky moment, and you pretty much show us a Minsky, an institutionalist Minsky, in somehow discussing the stages on capitalism, and the talk on consumption as a social process and the provisioning, and now how we can conceptualize the diverse economic relations. So considering the three talks, I'm trying to draw this line. What links all this, your research agenda? This is the first one. Let me. The second one is I would like to ask if you could please give us more context about the American institutionalism and the work of Thorstein Veblen. So much more baby steps, and who is Veblen?
Okay.
And what is the context of the American institutionalism? And finally, I would like to ask if you could please drop us a line of your book project that are announced in the program, the feminist economics of functional finance. So if you could comment on that as well.
Okay.
I have.
You want me to answer? This is a law. Let's just answer this. I will be okay.
Yes, that's. Let's have those answers and maybe
Okay, let him ask.
one.
Maybe it's
Yes,
similar.
let's and yes, go. La vas en español.
Well, again, thanks for the presentation. I'll insist a little bit in my yesterday question. So, how we can see the consumption as a process in a way that it could be derived from the habitus. It's an expression of the habitus, and even a way to keep a power relations. I mean, it's determined by elites, or is something made in the social base more.
Yes. Okay. I will incorporate this question into the Veblen answer, into the Veblen question. The link amongst those three, if I can be most general, at the end of the day, the economy is about real resources, moving real resources around, distributing, creating, using real resources. However, the danger is to imagine that the economy is driven by that purpose or by that desire to get real resources. The economy is driven by making money, our capitalist economy. In the early neoclassical thought, as it emerged, one of the objectives is, yes, to say that we are talking about real resources, and we are framing the analysis in terms of exchange, and we're using utilitarian value. So they drop money out of the analysis. And so what my work basically, the kind of commonalities, I'm interested in emphasizing that at the end we are making choices or decisions about real resources, but that understanding money and understanding, for example, debt relations, financialization, and so on, it's extremely important, and also it's important to separate the kind of objectives of making the goods versus the objective of the ceremonial objective of what money is about, and so that we are able to see that if we want to solve, let's say, a social problem, we should focus on the technical, on the real resources. But as scholars, we cannot imagine that money is not real. It's not a real resource in a sense, but money is real in terms of governing action. So I think all of my talks, this is a common thing, to be able to separate and not to be limiting ourselves by saying, we don't have money. Yes, we don't have money as individuals, but we as society can create a permission to move real resources and not use money as an excuse of not doing something. Like public university, there is a commitment to have it. If you sell yourself to the point is to saying, we never have the money, and therefore you will not have it. You will not have it. And so, but anyway, so all of this is linked. The basis is Veblen because of his kind of distinction of what is industrial or what is a problem-solving approach, as opposed to what are the impositions and restrictions that society puts as a kind of ceremonies that we allow to either censor us or allow us to prevent us to address real technical issues. So Veblen, Thorstein Veblen, in United States, U.S. economist from Scandinavian origin, was a prolific writer, and one of his famous books in 1899, The Theory of the Leisure Class, became most notorious about the theory of consumption, and pointed out it's not only about that, right? It's about explaining the social, cultural, economic structure of the American, or generally Western, but primarily American economy. And so when you pointed out about the habitus, which is the Pierre Bourdieu's concept from sociology, the habitus is also not only about consumption, it's about social class. And Veblen's theory of the leisure class was about class, social class. And so his theory of the leisure class was only in connection within the overall system. And so he argued the theory of the leisure class kind of puts up the standards of what is most desirable, but nobody can achieve that, so they kind of adjust, so they try to emulate. So it's the emulative process. So the habitus is also about emulation, right, in different ways. So you compensate with so-called cultural capital, social capital, and so on. So I feel that they're complementary. They're just using different languages and different. So Veblen then in 1904 wrote The Theory of the Business Enterprise, which basically discussed in a kind of, he had an empirical discussion also bringing from his knowledge of how companies at that time, businesses operate, and he brought up there is the business concern and then the industrial concern. There is the pecuniary or the monetary, and there is the engineering concern. So in our, then when we extrapolated, and later on he wrote about the industrial arts within the overall society, which is about technology and technological innovation that is curtailed by the money-making motive, by what is financially feasible as opposed to technically feasible. So he extrapolated this not just to the business enterprise, but to the overall economy, and including the business cycles. So kind of he had even macro in him. So then in 1923, and I'm skipping many books, but the key book is the Absentee Ownership. And basically this is a theory and a history of American capitalism, 1923. And then after that he published other essays and eventually died. But this is one of his main last work that is of importance. And all of them are connected. So in the Absentee Ownership, he talks about basically stages of capitalism. So in other work, I kind of try to match Minsky and Veblen's stages of capitalism. And in this, he's talking about the emergence of the financier as an institution. He talks about the credit economy, and he discusses this also in 1904 in the theory of the business enterprise. And so basically he's discussing how the different stages of capitalism have different main institution, person. So the manufacturer and then the creditor. But within the absentee ownership, he actually discusses also consumption. Although it's through the salesmanship and innovation in marketing and so on. He has excellent, very interesting examples and quotes in the footnotes of absentee ownership. And so in his whole work, he is not only kind of, often Veblen is labeled as atheoretical or just about consumption. People don't think about the connection to the next work. So I think one important thing to remember about Veblen, that all of this work, the leisure class, consumption, is about social class and social structure. So he did not explain it only the leisure class and the only kind of the ones that determine, because the others have also agencies. They choose how to emulate, there is a class structure that is not only regulated by the leisure class, but they have their influence. But then then this is connected to the business structure, the business enterprise, and the different methods of making money. And then the absentee ownership book is the emphasis is not only about business production, and now we're talking about the stages where production is not even desired. We want to capture free income, skipping production altogether. And so this is very important in a contemporary context, even though he was 1923, imagine how long ago. Of course, we can make the contemporary adjustments and the new examples of the ways to make money without producing anything, and bring in Veblen in that way in contemporary. Now the last question, so does this answer a little bit about the habitus? I mean, this is.
It was, on the way, this consumption and, how we say, a form to make violence, symbolic violence,
Okay.
keep these power relations, no? And I mean, the consumption not as a natural process, it's social, as you say.
Yes.
So, how is a form to keep these power relations between the elite, and it can reproduce some submission or oppression dynamics? It's more on that way. Let's say.
Yes, it is very consistent with Veblen, and that is why I started studying consumption, because often it's was seen as a kind of interesting topic, but I wanted to relate it to power and to class structure, violence, like you said, so it is, and that is the whole point of why it's important to taking out from the personal perceptions, personal identities, and so on, and to see it as essential in our society in maintaining class distinction and structure, therefore. So yes. Now, the last question about the book that is titled The Feminist Economics of Functional Finance, a Social Provisioning Approach. First of all, the social provisioning approach I try to figure out, and that's what all this work is about, that, right? Which is the basis. And you see a feminist influence just because feminism, the first thing about feminism is to recognize that women are people too. And then after that, we also want to recognize the diversity of life within society and not to have imposed categories. So this is part of it too. But then the other notion of feminist analysis of money, I always, early on, even as a student, thought that there is a gap. Okay. And so my initial interest was about bringing in post-Keynesianism, feminism, and yes, institutionalism too. The term functional finance in the United States is associated with Albert Lerner, and the idea that the composition of government and public expenditure is as important also as the level of it, of the government expenditure. So my focus is on money, but also with regards to these actions of austerity and the various austerities that have taken place within our economy in the name of money is scarce, right? And that, what's the implication on this, on the overall sphere within the economy, but overall within households, and how this may be a result of a kind of understanding of money that is not informed, for example, by gender relation, but not only of gender relation, but generally of the diverse socialities that we have in the economy. So all of this is leading to this. My austerity was my initial interest, and how this is underlined by the theories of money. And then once you get into the theories of money, you are getting into these questions of what money is, and then should we oppose money to some sort of gift economy? And my answer is no. We should look at it we should break down our categories. So my next step, well, this is currently I want to think a little bit more about those forms of sociality. And the next step is the application more to the policy realm. Okay. Oh, so you are giving.
Well, now we have another 3 questions. Carol?
Yeah, just a very quick. This is from a personal interest in your theory. Very straightforward. How do you see, one of the things that I struggle at UMKC is that there was really not engagement with, despite the fact that they will argue that there was really no engagement with interdisciplinary analysis, incorporating sociology, anthropology, all those areas, despite the fact that it's heterodoxy. So how do you see that this will, I mean, I'm fascinated by the 2 papers, especially the consumption process, because it seems to me that it allows for the incorporation of schools of thought like post-colonialism and looking at beyond the West, complex societies, like the case of Mexico, that the non-market is big, it's huge, and the market sector dominates, but still we have so-called reciprocity and credit debt relationships that do not have a unit of account. So is that one of your purposes? Or
Yes.
is just mainly engaging with Western scholars?
Hold on. Just, we will have 2 more. Well, 1, because I'm going to use my chance. 1 more, una más. Bueno, entonces aprovecho yo. What is the relationship between predatory predation in this creation of money, ability to creation of money, and austerity inside of your system? How can we make this logic or argument?
This is one of the kind of desire for the book, is to make this logic, to articulate this logic. But yes, the point is to exit from so-called economics imperialism by definition, by the narrow definition of economics, and also within basically a Western definition too. Again, and I think that way that I'm suggesting to think about the economy is definitely more open to consider what you said, other different economies and cultures. And again, all of it is so that you have different contexts, so that you are flexible in your context, so that you don't impose. Because one of the big danger is when we start considering the social and start imposing categories onto the social, like even gift, and they just see gift through the eyes of exchange, right? And so the same thing, imposing categories and local context and just annihilating the whole diversity of the context. So definitely this is, and during my time at UMKC, well, there was a little bit, but there was not much of feminist. I would say only one person. And also, so yes, was the struggle, but there was still way much more interdisciplinarity than any other program in the United States. I mean, just and so obviously obviously all this work is driven by interdisciplinarity and so on. One danger of interdisciplinarity is that economics has been so, mainstream economics has been so influential onto other disciplines that they have gotten categories, and then in our effort to import them, we re-import. It's like an export, import, re-import concepts, and so we have to be careful about that. But I agree with you. Then this complex question about what is a predatory activity. It does not need to be criminal activity in Veblen. So getting something for nothing, like let's say speculation, commodity futures, whatever. They have all impact on real resources, real life. They may not be real in a sense, like they may not create a real activity, but they have impact. And so to the extent that the public policies and so on, they have different functions, but one is like to move public resources. Well, public resources are drained, or can be drained in that way. So definitely I should, that is where kind of I was going with the feminist economics of functional finance also. Yes, but it's not a very easy thing to articulate.
Okay. Well, ¿tenemos alguna otra pregunta? Ya sería la última. Moni, ¿cómo vamos de tiempo? ¿Bien? Bueno, parece que no. Hay más preguntas, pues agradecemos la participación de la doctora Zdravka Todorova con esta muy interesante posición de Veblen. Is Veblen and the other one? The feminist? No, the other one. I always forget. I'm sorry. No, it's not Minsky. The first you mentioned, the relationship between Veblen and Schumpeter. No, Schumpeter, no. I'm sorry, now I'm so tired. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Todavía nos falta una sesión ahorita. No, o sea, no hay Galbraith, is the one I was looking for. Galbraith, John Galbraith. Tenemos todavía una sesión por parte de los alumnos en presentar sus avances de trabajo a las 2 en punto y terminamos con la última mesa de 4 a 6. Muy interesante va a estar también la última mesa, entonces pues rogamos que puedan regresar. Tenemos un break ahorita, sí, y reanudamos a las 2 de la tarde. Entonces, muchísimas gracias, Zdravka. Thank you very much. Gracias a todos. All right.